Hey, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. At AFN, one of our fundamental beliefs is that change is where opportunity happens. And the best way to take advantage of opportunity in change is to have a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. Couple of things that we talk about on a leader's role within an organization is to be the head of market intelligence, really understanding what's going on within your market and how your company addresses it. And the second area that we think is a strong responsibility for an organization's leader is acquiring and organizing resources. And when we think about people within our organizations, they are an ever more critical resource in our knowledge economy. And how we support employees really reflects our culture, reflects our values, and makes a difference in attracting and retaining them. When we think about this, everyone values and interprets benefits a little bit differently. So we have Matt Roberts on to help us really decipher how to think about this. Matt's director of group benefits for Hub International and a member of their national strategy team and has more than 20 years of experience in the benefit space. So welcome, Matt, and I'll hand it to you to give us a little bit of your view of the world.
Thanks, Matt. View of the world is lots changing. I think somebody once said the only constant's change. And our focus is really looking past a normal conception of what an employee benefit is and maximize the ROI that companies get for it. The studies are out there. Employees have a very low level of understanding of their employee benefits. It's usually a second largest line item after after salary in the total compensation package. And employees just really have to be more cognizant, and it's our job and the client's job, our employer's job of really trying to educate people on the value of the benefits and make sure it is maximized. I think what we're seeing a lot is the different generations all having unique needs. The personalization of the employee benefits program, one size fits all, fits no one, and really trying to look beyond just generalities. If you think about any information you consume, the more general it is, the less relevant it is, and the more it goes in one ear and out the other. So that's kind of the state of the world in the employee benefits sector, Matt.
Cool. Okay, so maybe just starting out as we're thinking about this from the leader's perspective, what do you think are some of the mistakes that leaders are making as they're thinking about this within their organization?
The top one that we look at is that when benefit decisions are made, they're personalized through the lens of the decision-making team. And if everybody in that team are in their 40s and 50s, they're going to view the importance of certain benefits differently than people in their 20s and 30s. The reality is we have the data available to show people what each generation wants or where people are in their stage of their career and at their age. So it's not even generation. It's a number of other factors of what they're looking for and what they need. I'm always a chief example of that. I mean, a lot of times I view things and I'm like, I don't see a benefit in this. And then I really have to take a step back and be like, well, hold on. I may not see a benefit in it, but could somebody else
Right.
see a benefit in it? Or what could be the benefit to one of my clients or their employees?
Okay, so it's normal for us to be looking at the lens of our employees' needs through our own experience, but that's not necessarily telling us what's going to be valued out there. How do you shift people's view of that in such a way that they can get what you're saying and say, hey, we've got to actually, instead of having a narrow view, we've got to open it up a little wider.
Data. And it's not just data. My background is underwriting. So I love data. I love numbers. I love anything that can help explain a story. But for the longest time, I was always data's king. That's what I said. That's what somebody else said. I love that expression. But then it got to the point of, well, if it's just data and we can't do anything with it, all it is data, right? It's not, okay. So we know about it, but how do we fix it? And if we can't do anything, well, then it's more of a nuisance than it is of a benefit. So the new mantra is actionable data is king. And
Mhm.
by taking a look at your workforce, at your demographics, to better understand that population. You can ensure your workforce strategy supports every corner of the population. So really data is going to drive this more than anything.
Um, as we're thinking about the choices that we make for the benefits that we deliver, I would say that a lot of times leadership is a service-oriented role, and in service to that, we're often trying to think about how are we not just making sure that we're attracting and retaining employees in the right way, but how are we doing it in a way that can seem fair? How do you respond to that idea of fairness around benefits?
Be transparent with employees. I mean, that's the most thing. Realize that every action is not going to benefit 100% of your employees, but be transparent as to why you're doing certain things and get them to understand it, but also communicate other aspects too. When we talk about the personalization of the benefits program, offering one benefit will maybe only be of interest in one niche within your workforce. But if you offer multiple benefits and they hit multiple niches, that's what's going to be beneficial. With communication and transparency, too many times I've been part of this, and it's not until you evolve in your career where you see this, you go into a closet, come up with a strategy for open enrollment and spring it on employees. And why not have a year-round communication of here's what we're trying to accomplish with our employee benefit program. Here's what we're trying to do for you, our most important asset and resource. And bear with us as we migrate through this, because unfortunately, there's not just a blueprint, do this and everything's great. While a lot of companies have very strong overlap as far as what they need and how they should do it, there are going to be some unique things from client to client that you have to be cognizant of.
Just to maybe make that point a little bit more real, when we spring open enrollment on folks, what are the comments that come back from employees about it? Like, what makes it actually hurt when you do that?
They feel blindsided. Healthcare increases over the last year or two on the tails of the pandemic. Because when the pandemic came into place, everyone was at home. They didn't go out. So medical services dropped. We saw very steady renewals in 2020, 2021, even early 2022. And all of a sudden, people went out, got stuff taken care of that they didn't during COVID, didn't take care of themselves during COVID, and then led to larger than average increases. So when you're in a situation where you're expecting you're paying $100 a month for insurance right now, and you heard about open enrollment and you're tuning in, this is our open enrollment meeting, and you're like, hey, here's all the changes. By the way, it's now $180 a month, and it just went up 80%. How are you as an employee supposed to react to that, especially when open enrollment windows are 7 to 10 days? So having constant communication throughout the year mitigates that negativity. Sometimes it's positive, like, hey, we created this new benefit, right? But if you want to maximize the benefit that you're putting in, why not give everyone a preview of it? Why not tell people, hey, be on the lookout? Why not create some buzz, some excitement in advance, right? Think about movies. Sometimes what's the best part of a movie? The preview, right? So we don't want that to be the best part of the benefit, the preview, and then fail to execute, but generates buzz, right? I mean, people want it. People are interested, right? So just don't spring it on an employee one time and that's it. Really try that communication cycle. But by and large, most of the time it's negativity. Carriers changed, deductibles have increased, your costs have increased. So a lot of this really makes the open enrollment experience not so fun for your average employee.
Why do you think leaders delay on talking about this? Why don't they give a preview of it?
With my industry, the healthcare industry, everything is set up for the employer to fail when it comes to the execution of delivering a robust benefits program. It starts with the renewal. Most of the time, you only get it 60 to 90 days in advance of the renewal date. If it's bad, the rest of the market perceives it as bad, and you just really don't have enough time to explore options properly.
Okay.
And it's really been driven into a transactional element as much as possible. Um, Sometimes the renewal is not going to be good. You hired employees or you have employees with higher than average utilization, but you're not going to figure out how to solve that problem in 2 or 3 weeks right before a renewal. That's just not realistic. So the greater you get into a year-round benefits management of the program, year-round, the greater likelihood you can be ahead of the game. See around
Okay.
the but yeah, I mean, the big issue is just the transactional nature of insurance. And look, if you're not getting any data and you don't understand it and you relate it to property casualty or gas or anything else, yeah, it's transactional. It's going to be a problem. But I think the key is to really plan ahead and arm yourself with actionable data.
Okay. And so we talked about health insurance a little bit around this. Can you give us a sense of like what are the range of needs? What are some of the things that, are outside of the health insurance radar that we're seeing organizations, A, employees are asking for, B, what employers are actually starting to provide?
Yeah, I think the most conversations I'm having these days are paid family leave, and integrated policy. I think first of all, there's a lot of confusion with clients as each state starts to roll out their own paid family leave policies. How does this integrate? We have our own internal policy. We have a short-term disability policy. We have employees in 8 states that have their own policy. So what's the cohesive message to employees, and is there a better, more efficient way to administer that program? So I think that's an important one. Also on the coattails, that's one that's sometimes lost in a generation divide. And I give myself as a perfect example. Say I had a child this year. I'm in kind of mid-Gen Xer. And if a company had 12 weeks of paid family leave, I don't know how much time I would take off. I know we live in a different time and era. Maybe 2 weeks, but I certainly wouldn't take off 12 weeks. It's just not the way I was raised. So that how we're raised really influences our perception of different policies too. But just because it doesn't work for me doesn't mean that somebody that's Gen Z or Gen Y wouldn't find it important or they wouldn't take 12
Right.
weeks off. And I can't be judgmental of that because it's not me, it's more important to them. And it's about ranking importance of what you're doing. So I think paid family leave is a big one. I think anything focused on student loan repayment and assistance and education is a big one. Again, the older decision makers are not seeing that, but that's something that really impacts Gen Z and Gen Y. And I think other benefits that just are meant to protect people. So we talk about um, medical insurance protects you from catastrophic, and retirement gets you ready for when you retire. But what about mental health, which is partly underneath the medical umbrella? But what also about financial wellness, overall wellness? Just making sure having a holistic approach to helping your employees. Because if you're struggling with any part of your wellness, whether it's mental, medical, financial, it's going to have an impact on the rest of the organization. So I think the holistic wellness view is important. And I probably shouldn't use the word holistic because I hate that word because a lot of people say it's holistic, but then they don't have any solution. Like, what does it exactly mean? Like, okay, again, we've identified the problem with data, but we have no way to do it. But there are different resources that kind of help employees along the way. So those are some of the other ones. Obviously, insurance products, but I try to, at least my team tries to stay away from hawking product. It's not about trying to sell stuff. It's really trying to look and find those solutions. And many times has nothing to do with insurance. It's just really looking at gaps in the benefits program.
Well, I think your point is really well taken. So what happens outside of our work? You're getting paid for what you do at your work, but what happens outside your work definitely impacts how well you are able to work. And so the requirement for us to be able to think about that idea of wellness across the board can be pretty darn important.
Yeah,
Um,
talking about that outside of work, sometimes where we live and work is the same now. We work from home, right? So it's not so much I go to the office, I leave, I go home, I'm on my merry way. Sometimes it's both, right? And that's
Yep.
another challenge as well. Um, but yeah.
On the paid family leave stuff, um, obviously, the example that you brought up is when you have a child, right? What we're seeing in terms of demographic shifts is that older parents often are requiring care in some way. How are organizations thinking about that in relation to the paid family leave stuff?
Yeah, I'm in that sandwich generation where I could potentially have younger children. I have to be cognizant of how do I get care for them? How do I take time off? Where's the right daycare setting? But then I could also have parents in my upper 70s and 80s that also need care. And the amount of work that goes into identifying the resources to help on that front is mind-boggling. It's something like an individual could spend 20 hours a week doing the research and focus on this. So if you don't have the right partners in play to help your employees focus on this, they're not working 40 hours and then adding it to 20 weeks on top. What's happening is they're working 30 or 25 hours doing the 20 hours of research on their own. But that's a huge issue. I think a lot of times we think aging is unique, but it's not. It's unique to us. We're only going to have one set of parents, maybe some step parents, but we're only going to have one set of parents. And their aging is unique to us, but aging is not unique. Everybody ages. And it's hard. It's any other decision in life. If you're like, hey, go change oil in your car and you never done it before, how are you going to do it? It's not second nature. You're going to spend a lot of time researching it. And the same is true of what do I do with an aging parent? Huge issue these days. And fortunately, there are some firms focused specifically on helping employees navigate that. It's win-win. It reduces the time the employee spends on it so they can spend more time, be more productive at work. It gives them a huge resource and it allows them to identify the right avenues to take. And that's not something you can research it all you want. If you don't have an expert in your corner or
Yep.
somebody helping you, you don't know if you're making the right decision. You're making the best decision based on what you're looking at via Google. And you don't know who
Right.
writes those articles.
Right. Um, okay, so good set of thoughts there. On the mental health front, um, I would say arguably, a lot more tricky than what we've thought about on the physical health front. What are some organizations doing to support the mental health of their employees right now?
Um, they're trying to do a lot, but the number one thing we always say is first and foremost, inventory what you have with mental health. Going back to communication I mentioned at the beginning of when we were chatting, so many times employees are unaware of programs that are out there. They're unaware of an employee assistance program. They're unaware that they have virtual health visits that can help with mental health. There's a huge bandwidth by region and by area um, problem when it comes to seeing mental health professionals. If you're struggling, it doesn't help to call somebody and say, okay, we could get you in 6 weeks, right? That's not going to help you. What are you going to do over the next 6 weeks? And a lot of times there are resources that companies have through their medical plan or through their employee assistance program that people just aren't aware of. So communicate that for starters, inventory everything you have, and where possible, measure utilization. Something like employee assistance programs, utilization is embarrassingly low, like 1% to 2%. Now, on the flip side, I also don't expect it to be 79 or 80%, but I think a lot of that lack of utilization is just unawareness. And think about it. If you're only communicating your benefits once a year at open enrollment, what are people retaining? I mean, if they're not having any mental health issues or mental health problems or stress, remember, mental health conversations will be general, right? Goes in one ear and out the other. They're not going to remember 6 months later, oh yeah, I remember at open enrollment, this guy talked about mental health in the employee assistance program. So first and foremost, inventory what you have. Secondly, communicate the heck out of it. Third, measure it. If you can do those things, then you can identify what else do we need to be doing. There's a lot of partners out there that clients can contract with directly. But I think a lot of companies need to do those first basics things before they
Right.
just throw in more dollars at the problem.
Right. Okay. So you said 1 to 2% utilization is bad. 79%, it may be unreachable. When we're thinking about just like the looking at whether or not adding a benefit in and whether or not it's successful, um, I'm assuming there's going to be a broad range here, but when you're thinking about that, like when we add something, what do you think spells success for us as an organization? How should we be benchmarking ourselves?
It's not always a percentage. I mean, if you do something and only 1% or 2% take advantage of it, it probably isn't the right fit. Now, there could be a situation where you're only going to have kind of a fraction, a sliver of people take advantage of it, just like a catastrophic claim in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
So it's not to say we completely dismiss it, but I think we have to prioritize in most instances of what's going to have the greatest impact. I think the success is employee feedback on what was rolled out. So I think we've
Okay.
seen successful things at our employer. We've looked at it as a success, even if we didn't participate in it, even if we didn't choose it, but everyone around was excited about it. And, people who were personally positively impacted by what the company was doing. And
Hmm.
it's really building that positive culture. So it's not always a percentage, but if you do want to maximize the percentage, you obviously want to focus on low-lying fruit and start with benefits that are going to have the greatest impact. And then just constantly listen for employee feedback, constantly listen.
Um, so on one side of the spectrum, we've talked about, hey, if you're only hearing about things once a year, the likelihood of retention is pretty low. Uh, if we're communicating about all the time, that can end up looking like noise to folks as well. What do you think are the meaningful ways that we should be communicating in such a way that it's actually have an impact with our employees?
So first of all, we have to understand the different generations and how they take information. And I'll use myself as Gen X. I'm pretty classic at this. So I fit a lot of Gen X. That's why it really appeals to me. Um, if you need me to do something, give me a call. Don't send me an email. Don't send me 3 emails. Don't send me an email with 47 attachments. I'm not going to look at any
Hmm.
of that. Give me a call. So that's the way I prefer to be communicated. Now, I'm not going to say every Gen X is going to feel the same way, but there's a lot of overlap. And then, you have generations like in between generations, right? And I forget what they're exactly called, but you could be a young Gen X or an old Gen Y, and their traits may be a little bit differently. If I look at
Hmm.
Gen Y or the millennials, they like emails. If I look at Gen Z, this is millennials, they like text messages. But imagine sending information about your benefits program to baby boomers via text message. Do you think that's the best avenue? Probably isn't. So
Right.
first and foremost, you really have to take inventory of how you're communicating. The second thing is you can't send daily emails. To your point, it's noise. Like I got daily emails. I do that all the time with people that solicit me. Like after 2 emails, they go into spam. It's like, first of
Right.
all, I'm not the person that makes a decision for the cleaning of my building. So why are you emailing me to begin with? It's like off target. And secondly,
Yeah.
it's like you're a nuisance. So I think you have to be careful. And again, you almost have to communicate what you're going to communicate in advance. Here's what we're going to do a little bit different. And the key always is think of communication like an iceberg. What you send to people is a tip, but you give them the ability to see the full iceberg by clicking the link or going to your online enrollment portal or about going to a different resource. Because if you give them the whole iceberg, it's going to be a problem because again, it's communication overload. What am I supposed to be retaining? You give me 7 paragraphs on a topic I know nothing about. I'm not going to retain it. But if you come up with something creative, something to engage them, something to get them to take the next step, that's what the goal should be.
So, I mean, when we're thinking about customization overall, thinking about the range of benefits that you offer and the ability to people for people to choose, but also you got to have a really good sense of what your population looks like and how you should be communicating with them. One form of communication likely is not going to cut it. You're going to have to think about multimodal communication.
Agreed. Agreed. And the most basic thing, and I know we started this, I should have added this to my view or some of the delinquencies and benefit programs too, is the myth of choice. So that's another big problem. I always give this example. There was a report I read. But the concept's the same. People went in and did jam tasting, like jelly. I didn't make up the topic. I'm just going with what the report said.
Yeah.
They had two tables. They had one table with 6 different jams and another table with 20 different jams. So needless to say, to taste testing, the table with 20 different jams was a hit. All these different flavors, jalapeno, random flavors, whatever, it was a hit. But when it came to the buying process, there was information overload and confusion with that table, and people actually bought less than the table that had 6 jams. And when we say employees want choice, we want choice on things we are familiar with or we understand. We don't necessarily, and I know some people will disagree with me, we don't want choices on medical plans. We don't want 5 medical plans. Because if it was easy to make a decision, 86% of people would be able to define copay, coinsurance, deductible, and out-of-pocket max. Yet 86% of people can't define those most basic terms. Yep. So we have to be careful about choice. But we have to really think about what are the myths that are out there. And again, choice is a huge one. It's not to say no choice, one plan, one doctor. That's not what we're talking about, but simplify the delivery. So back to the communication. Do you want to make the communication complex as possible, or do you want to make it simple?
Right. Okay. So as we're thinking about making decisions around what we're offering to our employees, and that it reflects our culture all those things, the reality is that we live in a world of scarce resources. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. That's where innovation comes from. But when we're thinking about scarce resources, that means that we literally cannot deliver everything that people might ask for around the benefits that could be offered. When you think about having to offer those choices, or when a leader might be struggling to figure out which choice to make and explain those choices, what advice would you give on that?
So I think there's a few ways to look at it. If you develop something, I alluded to it before, an employer value proposition, where people know what you're coming to work for, I think that is going to make the decision of which benefits are going to fit in better. And I think we talked about that, Matt, before the webinar started. But I think what's important to the organization, what's important to the culture, what's important to the tenets of the organization is going to help rank what you're going to do. The second part of that is also, where are you struggling within your organization? We do something for clients called a persona analysis. We break out their population into 7 distinct personas. And they all have different needs based on age and years of service and where they are at your company and everything. And if there's a certain segment that you're struggling with, that's probably where you'd want to start. It could be you're hiring new employees and they're just not going through the organization and staying. The range of costs of rehiring an employee or replacing an employee, I've seen studies as high as 70%, which I laugh at, maybe like the chief executive officer. But I think conservatively, I use conservative numbers, 20 to 25%. So if you hire somebody for $100,000, costs basically $20,000 or $25,000 to recruit them, bring them on board, whatever, get them up to speed.
Yep.
If you're leaving 1 year later, that's a problem because you're going through that process again, right, and spending that money. So if that is one of the personas where you're struggling with, well, then we got to focus there. But if there's a different persona, then we got to focus there. And then, as I alluded to before, I think a lot of times is, what are the low-lying fruit? And then where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? I use the example with clients, and back in the day, everyone's like, hey, we're going to do a smoking cessation program. I'm like, do you know how many smokers you have? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, then you got to focus there. But if there's a different persona where you're struggling with, well, then we got to focus there. And then, as I alluded to before, I think a lot of times is, what are the low-lying fruit? And then where are you going to get the most bang for your buck? I use the example with clients, and back in the day, everyone's like, hey, we're going to do a smoking cessation program. I'm like, do you know how many smokers you have? And they're like, no. okay, what if you did a study and found out one person smoked? Like, would it be a good use of your
Right,
resources to do a
right.
smoking cessation program for one person?
Yeah.
Probably not. So,
I really like what you said in terms of as you're thinking about the organization and the values and culture that are present within it. If you look at the benefits through that lens, that actually can help you make some decisions, and it makes it so it's a lot easier to explain and reinforce what the culture is for the organization.
yeah, and it's beyond the benefits. It's just, I've seen companies actually put their employer value proposition online, but you can do it through the benefits. And this is a challenge for anybody that's going to be watching this. Go to your webpage, go to your career section, and check out your benefits. And what I see more times than not, we offer medical, dental, vision, life, disability, retirement, and PTO. Great. So does every other company.
Right, right.
So how does that distinguish you from any other company?
Yeah, yeah.
So talk about what is it specific about your medical plan, or what are some of the new wrinkles that companies do? It could be pet insurance. Pet insurance, like Gen Z, Gen Y, I love that. Heck, we just adopted a cat and I bought pet insurance. Unfortunately, my cat got sick before like the waiting period kicked in, but the bottom line is like even I understand the value in that, and that's something that raises the optics. Like who doesn't like pets, right?
Right, right.
Uh,
Good deal. Well, thanks a lot for the discussion, Matt. This is fantastic. Really appreciate it. And if folks want to hit you up, I'm assuming we can share your contact info.
Absolutely. I would always love to chat with people, say what's on their mind. If they disagree with anything I said, we'd love to have the conversation. So this isn't evolution. It's hard to really say that.
Yeah,
You have to evolve. And I wish I could say I had all the answers for every organization, but I think the best thing to do is really take a deep dive within your organization, assess, get data, get actionable data, and do your best. Be transparent with your employees.
great. Well, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, man.